In a universe where humanity is considered nothing more than a primitive species barely worthy of acknowledgement, where the greatest minds of 1,000 civilizations gather to shape the future of galactic society, one human dares to walk through doors that were never meant for his kind. The Seraphic Institute stands as the pinnacle of intellectual achievement across 12 star systems, a place where only the most evolved, the most gifted, the most genetically superior beings earn the right to study. For 3 millennia, no human has ever set foot within its crystalline halls, until now. Marcus Chen carries with him the weight of a dead world, the memories of a species written off as evolutionary dead ends, and a secret that could either elevate humanity to unprecedented heights or destroy everything the galaxy holds sacred. He doesn't know it yet, but his arrival at the Institute will shatter assumptions that have stood for centuries and prove that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from perfection, but from the raw, unpolished determination of those who have nothing left to lose. The galaxy is about to learn why humans don't just survive. They thrive in places where angels fear to tread. Marcus Chen pressed his palm against the cold metal of the transport ship's viewing port and watched as the Seraphic Institute grew larger in the darkness of space. The structure defied every law of architecture he had ever learned, twisting through dimensions that hurt to look at directly. Crystalline spires stretched impossibly far in all directions, their surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to communicate in a language older than human civilization. Final approach commencing, announced the ship's artificial intelligence in a tone that managed to convey both mechanical precision and subtle disdain. Passenger Chen, Marcus. Species designation, human. Academic sponsor, Professor Ethrak of the Zenthari Collective. Warning. This vessel's life support systems are calibrated for standard galactic atmospheric requirements. Human physiological limitations have been noted and accommodated. Marcus said nothing. He had grown accustomed to these casual reminders of his species' perceived inferiority during the 3-week journey from the Outer Rim territories. The other passengers, a delegation of crystalline beings whose thoughts manifested as visible aurora around their translucent bodies, and a group of insectoid scholars whose compound eyes processed light spectrums that would blind most organic life forms, had made their opinions clear through carefully polite indifference. The transport shuddered as it entered the Institute's docking field, and Marcus felt his stomach lurch, not from the movement, but from the weight of what lay ahead. He was the first human to ever receive admission to the Seraphic Institute, the galaxy's most prestigious center of learning. It should have been an honor. Instead, it felt like walking into a trap that had been 3 years in the making. His acceptance had come through Professor Ethrak, a being he had never met but whose reputation preceded him like a legend. Ethrak belonged to the Zenthari, a species that had transcended physical form over 2 million years ago and now existed as pure consciousness interfacing with reality through biomechanical constructs. They were among the founding members of the Institute, and their word carried weight that could move planets. The question that had haunted Marcus since receiving his acceptance was simple. Why him? He was nobody special by galactic standards. Born on a dying colony world in the outer reaches, orphaned when the local star began its premature collapse, and raised in the refugee camps that dotted the asteroid belts like beads on a broken string, his education had been cobbled together from salvaged data cores and the bitter wisdom of survivors who had watched their civilizations crumble. He had no genetic enhancements, no cybernetic implants, no psychic abilities or dimensional awareness. He was, by every measure that mattered to the galactic community, entirely ordinary. Yet somehow, his thesis on quantum consciousness barriers had reached Professor Ethrak's attention. The work had been desperate, really. A wild theoretical framework he had developed while trying to understand why humans seemed immune to certain forms of psychic manipulation that worked on other species. He had submitted it to a minor academic journal on a lark, never expecting it to gain any attention beyond the handful of human scholars scattered across the galaxy. The docking clamps engaged with a resonant clang that Marcus felt in his bones. Through the viewing port, he could see the Institute's receiving bay, a vast space filled with beings that represented the pinnacle of evolution from across known space. Graceful figures that moved like liquid light glided between hovering platforms. Entities that existed partially in other dimensions flickered in and out of visual reality. Mechanical constructs the size of small buildings interfaced directly with the station's quantum networks, their consciousness spanning multiple processing cores simultaneously. And then there was him, 5'10" of unmodified human carrying everything he owned in a single duffel bag. Passenger Chen, Marcus, the AI announced again, disembarkation is authorized. Please note that the Institute's Universal Translation Matrix will require a 30-second calibration period upon your arrival. During this time, communication may be limited. Academic orientation begins in 6 standard hours. Failure to attend may result in immediate academic probation. The airlock cycled open with a soft hiss and Marcus stepped into the receiving bay. The first thing that hit him was the scale. The ceiling stretched so far overhead that it disappeared into a haze of atmospheric processors and gravitational field generators. The second thing was the noise. Not sound exactly, but a constant background hum of mental activity from hundreds of highly evolved beings thinking at frequencies that made his skin crawl. He took 3 steps before the translation matrix engaged, and suddenly the world exploded into comprehension. Conversations that had been meaningless noise became clear, and what he heard made his blood run cold. Human, of all things. I thought Professor Ethrock had better judgment than this, clearly some kind of experiment. Perhaps they want to establish a baseline for non-evolved intelligence. Dangerous precedent. Next, they'll be admitting the fungal collectives from the spiral arm. Marcus kept walking, forcing himself to maintain steady breathing as the conversations washed over him. He had expected this. Prejudice was nothing new in his experience. What caught him off guard was the undercurrent of genuine concern in some of the voices. These beings weren't just dismissive of humans, they were actively worried about his presence. The receiving area was divided into sections based on atmospheric requirements and gravitational preferences. Marcus followed the indicators toward the standard oxygen-nitrogen zone, passing through scanning fields that analyzed everything from his genetic structure to his quantum signature. Each scan seemed to surprise the monitoring systems, generating soft chimes that drew attention from nearby beings. "Fascinating," said a voice behind him. Marcus turned to find himself facing something that might have been a person, if you squinted and ignored the extra arms and the fact that its head was a shifting geometric pattern that hurt to look at directly. Your neural pathways are entirely biological. No quantum enhancement, no consciousness expansion, no dimensional awareness conditioning. How do you function with such limited processing capacity? "Very carefully," Marcus replied, which seemed to amuse the being. Its head pattern shifted to what he hoped was a more friendly configuration. "I am Kextherian Mole, second-year student in applied reality engineering. You must be the human that everyone is discussing. Marcus Chen, correct?" "That's me," Marcus said, though I wasn't aware I was famous. "Famous might be the wrong word," Kextharian said thoughtfully. "You are certainly unprecedented. No offense intended, of course, but humans are not typically considered intellectually capable of institute-level study. Your species ranks somewhere between the Graxian Moss collectives and the Crystal Singers of Bega Prime in terms of cognitive development. How did you manage to gain admission?" Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "I wrote something that Professor Ethrak found interesting." "Yes, I have heard about this. A theoretical framework regarding consciousness barriers, was it not? Quite bold for a species that has only recently developed faster than light travel." Kextharian's pattern shifted again, and Marcus caught what might have been genuine curiosity. "I confess, I am intrigued by the possibilities. Perhaps there are aspects of unenhanced consciousness that we have overlooked in our evolution." Before Marcus could respond, the air around them began to shimmer, and a presence made itself known. It wasn't visible in any conventional sense, but Marcus felt it like pressure against his thoughts. Vast, ancient, and utterly alien. Other beings in the area immediately stilled their conversations and turned their attention toward the disturbance. Student Chen, the presence communicated directly into his mind, and Marcus had to fight not to stagger under the weight of it. I am Professor Ethrak. The mental voice was like standing in a hurricane of pure information. Marcus could sense layers upon layers of consciousness, multiple thought processes running simultaneously at speeds that made human cognition seem glacial by comparison. Yet underneath it all, there was something else, a quality he couldn't quite identify, but that felt almost familiar. Professor? Marcus managed to respond aloud, unsure if his thoughts could even reach the Zenthari's level of existence. Thank you for this opportunity. I know it's unusual. Unusual? The presence seemed amused, and Marcus felt ripples of that amusement flow through the nearby crowd of students. Young Chen, your presence here is not unusual. It is impossible. By every standard measurement we have developed over 3 millennia of academic evaluation, your species should not be capable of the insights contained in your thesis. Yet here you are, and here your work stands, challenging assumptions that have guided our understanding of consciousness itself. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of alien gazes focusing on him. Some were curious, others hostile, but all were intensely interested in Professor Etrak's next words. You have been granted admission not despite your humanity, but because of it. Your unenhanced, unmodified consciousness has produced theoretical frameworks that our most advanced minds failed to consider. This suggests either a fundamental flaw in our understanding of intelligence itself, or the presence paused and Marcus could feel something like excitement building in the vast mind. Or humans possess capabilities that we have failed to recognize. I'm honored by your confidence, Marcus said carefully, but I have to ask, what exactly do you expect from me here? The question seemed to ripple through the crowd, and Marcus realized he had voiced what many of them were thinking. Professor Ethrak's presence expanded slightly, and when he responded, it was clearly meant for everyone present. What I expect, Student Chen, is for you to prove that intelligence is not merely a function of evolution or enhancement, but something far more fundamental and surprising. The galaxy has grown comfortable with its hierarchies of consciousness, its certainties about who can and cannot contribute to the advancement of knowledge. You are here to shatter those certainties. The presence began to withdraw, but not before leaving Marcus with a final, private communication that made his skin crawl. Your real education, young human, begins now, and I suspect it will be far more dangerous than you imagine. As Professor Ethrak's consciousness faded from the immediate area, Marcus found himself the center of attention from nearly 100 beings representing dozens of species. Their reactions ranged from fascination to hostility. But underneath it all, he sensed something else. They were afraid of what he might represent, afraid of what it might mean if a primitive human could challenge their understanding of the universe. And Marcus realized, with a certainty that settled in his bones like cold lead, that his presence at the Institute was about far more than academic achievement. He was here to prove something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy itself. The only question was whether he would survive long enough to figure out what that something was. Kixtharian's geometric head pattern shifted to what Marcus was learning to recognize as concern. I believe, Marcus Chen, that you have just become the most interesting person at the Institute. I hope for your sake that you are prepared for what that means. Marcus shouldered his duffel bag and looked around at the assembled beings. The pinnacle of galactic evolution, the most advanced minds in known space, all focused on one unremarkable human from a dead world. He thought about the refugee camps, the dying stars, the countless times his species had been dismissed as irrelevant to the greater conversation of the galaxy. I guess we'll find out, he said, and started walking toward his new life, toward questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered, toward a future that suddenly seemed a lot more uncertain than when he had been just another refugee with nothing to lose. Behind him, conversations resumed in a dozen languages and several dimensions, but now they all had a common theme. The human had arrived, and nothing would ever be quite the same. Marcus stood outside the door to his assigned quarters, holding the crystalline key that the housing administrator, a floating geometric shape that spoke in mathematical equations, had given him. The key felt warm against his palm, almost alive, and he wondered if it was analyzing him as much as he was analyzing it. His quarters were located in Section Gamma 7, which the administrator had explained was designated for experimental academic placements. Translation: they had stuck him in the section reserved for beings they didn't know how to categorize. His neighbors included a sentient gas cloud from the Whirlpool Galaxy and something that existed primarily as a collection of quantum probabilities but occasionally manifested as a small blue cube. The door responded to the key by dissolving entirely, which startled Marcus more than he cared to admit. Inside, the quarters were surprisingly comfortable, a standard humanoid layout with adjustments for his atmospheric needs. The walls showed real-time views of the galaxy outside, and Marcus could see star formations wheeling slowly past as the Institute followed its complex orbit around the Seraphic system's primary star. He dropped his duffel bag on the bed and immediately felt the weight of exhaustion settling over him. The past 6 hours had been a blur of orientation sessions, academic assessments, and administrative procedures that seemed designed to emphasize how different he was from everyone else. The cognitive evaluation alone had taken 3 hours, mostly because the testing equipment kept malfunctioning when applied to his unenhanced brain. Your neural patterns are highly irregular, the evaluating professor, a crystalline being whose thoughts manifested as musical tones, had informed him. We are detecting significant activity in regions that should be largely dormant in a consciousness of your development level. Most curious. Marcus had wanted to ask what that meant, but the professor had moved on to the next series of tests before he could form the question. Now, sitting alone in his quarters, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake coming here. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. Marcus looked around for an interface before realizing that the room itself was the communication system. The walls shimmered, and suddenly he was face to face with Kexterian, whose geometric head pattern was cycling through what Marcus was learning to recognize as excitement. Marcus Chen, I hope I am not interrupting your rest period. I wanted to invite you to join a study group that meets this evening. We are reviewing the foundational principles of quantum consciousness theory. I thought it might interest you, given your thesis work. Marcus felt a stab of anxiety. I'm not sure I'm ready for group study yet. I'm still figuring out the basic systems here. Nonsense, Kexterian said, and his pattern shifted to something that might have been encouragement. Besides, I believe you will find the other members of our group quite fascinating. We have Zephyr, who is a fourth-dimensional entity pursuing studies in temporal mechanics, and Veshara, a synthetic collective consciousness working on unified field theory. Oh, and there is also Naya. Something in the way Kexterian said the last name made Marcus pause. What species is Naya? That is complicated, Kexterian admitted. She claims to be human, like yourself, but that cannot be accurate. Humans do not possess her capabilities. The faculty has classified her as an unknown variant species for academic purposes. Marcus felt his heart stop. Another human? Here? As I said, she claims to be human, but where is this study group meeting? Marcus interrupted. Section Alpha 12, the Probability Gardens. But Marcus, you should know that Naya is unusual, even by Institute standards. She has been here for almost a year, and in that time she has challenged several fundamental theories that the faculty considered unassailable. Some of the professors are not pleased with her methods. Marcus was already reaching for his jacket. I'll be there. The journey to Section Alpha 12 took him through parts of the Institute he hadn't seen during orientation. The corridors here were older, with walls that seemed to be grown rather than built. Strange symbols pulsed along their surfaces, not writing exactly, but something that conveyed meaning directly to the mind. Marcus found himself understanding concepts he had no words for. Ideas about the nature of reality that made his brain ache with their implications. The probability gardens defied description. Marcus stepped through the entrance and found himself in a space that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Trees that might have been made of crystallized time grew alongside flowers that bloomed in dimensions he couldn't see but somehow knew were there. Students from dozens of species sat in study groups, their conversations creating ripples in the fabric of space-time itself. He found Kexterian's group near what might have been a pond if ponds could contain liquid starlight and reflect futures instead of faces. Three beings sat around a floating geometric construct that displayed equations in languages that shifted and evolved as Marcus watched. "Marcus!" Kextherian called out, his pattern brightening. "Come, meet the others." Zephyr turned out to be visible only as a distortion in the air, like heat shimmer, but her voice came from all directions at once. "The human approaches through probability streams I cannot fully calculate." Fascinating. Veskata was the synthic collective, thousands of individual consciousness sharing a single biomechanical form that looked like a cross between a tree and a computer server. "We greet you, singular being," they said in harmony. "Your mental signature is unlike anything in our experiential database." And then there was Naya. Marcus had been prepared for another human, but what he saw challenged his assumptions about what human meant. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with dark hair and features that could have come from any of Earth's old ethnic groups. But her eyes held depths that seemed older than civilizations, and when she moved, space itself seemed to bend slightly around her. "Hello, Marcus," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that made his bones vibrate. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." "You're really human?" Marcus asked, then immediately felt stupid for the question. Naya smiled, and for a moment she looked entirely ordinary. "Born on Earth, just like you." "Well, probably not just like you. I was born about 15,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries." Marcus stared at her. "That's impossible." "So is getting admitted to the Institute without any genetic modifications or consciousness enhancements," Naya replied. "Yet here we both are." Kextherian's pattern cycled through several configurations before settling on one that Marcus had learned meant confusion. "Naya, you have never explained how you have lived for so long, or how you came to possess capabilities that exceed those of species with millions of years of directed evolution. Haven't I?" Naya said innocently. "I could have sworn I mentioned it. Humans are quite a bit more interesting than the galaxy gives us credit for." Zephyr's shimmer intensified. "I have observed her across multiple probability streams. In 17% of observable futures, she does not exist at all. In 30%, she appears as she does now. In the remaining 50%, she manifests as something else entirely." "What kind of something else?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Difficult to articulate in linear terms," Zephyr replied. "In some streams, she appears as a fundamental force of the universe itself. In others, she is the absence where a fundamental force should be. Both possibilities are unsettling." Naya laughed, and the sound made flowers bloom in dimensions Marcus couldn't see. "Don't mind Zephyr. She gets dramatic about temporal mechanics. I'm just a human who learned to pay attention to things that most people ignore." "What kind of things?" Marcus asked. Instead of answering directly, Naya reached toward the floating equations that Kextherian's group had been studying. As her fingers approached the display, the mathematical symbols began to change, rearranging themselves into new configurations that pulsed with internal light. "Your standard consciousness theory assumes that awareness is generated by complex information processing," she said. "But what if it's the other way around? What if consciousness is the fundamental substrate and information processing is just one way it manifests?" The equations continued to evolve, and Marcus found himself understanding concepts that should have been far beyond his comprehension. The math was describing something profound about the nature of reality itself. A framework where consciousness wasn't produced by the universe but was the medium through which the universe existed. Veshara's multiple voices spoke in unison. "This formulation is unprecedented. If accurate, it would require revision of virtually all current theories of existence." "It would explain a few things," Naya said casually, "like why humans keep surprising everyone despite being supposedly primitive. We never learn to filter out the noise that most advanced species consider irrelevant. Sometimes that noise contains important information." Kextherian's pattern was cycling rapidly now. "You are suggesting that human consciousness operates on principles fundamentally different from evolved awareness." "I'm suggesting," Naya said, "that human consciousness might be closer to the original template than anyone realizes. Evolution isn't always improvement, Sometimes it's specialization that trades flexibility for efficiency. Marcus stared at the evolving equations, pieces of understanding clicking into place in his mind. That's why Professor Etrak was interested in my thesis. It wasn't just about consciousness barriers, it was about what those barriers protect us from. Very good, Naya said approvingly. Most advanced species have evolved beyond the ability to perceive certain fundamental aspects of reality. They've traded that perception for more specialized capabilities. But humans, she gestured and the equations collapsed into a single symbol that seemed to contain infinite complexity. Humans kept the original sensory package. Zephyr's distortion intensified. This explains the probability anomalies I have been detecting. If human consciousness operates outside standard parameters, it would create unpredictable variables in causal chains. Exactly, Naya said, and that makes humans either very useful or very dangerous depending on your perspective. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Is that why I'm really here? Not to learn, but to be studied. Naya's expression became serious. That's part of it, but there's more. The Institute has been experiencing some problems recently. Theoretical frameworks that have stood for millennia are starting to break down. Experiments are producing results that don't match predictions. They need fresh perspectives, and human consciousness might be exactly what they've been missing. What kind of problems? Marcus asked. Before Naya could answer, the garden around them suddenly went silent. Every conversation stopped, every movement ceased, as if the entire space had been placed under a temporal stasis field. Marcus looked around in alarm, but the others seemed to be experiencing it too. Detected, Veshara announced in their harmonic voice. All academic activities are suspended pending faculty assessment. Above them, the sky that showed the galaxy outside began to flicker, displaying emergency warning symbols in a dozen languages. An announcement echoed through the gardens in Professor Ethrak's unmistakable mental voice. All students report to designated shelter areas immediately. We are detecting temporal anomalies in multiple sectors of the Institute. This is not a drill. As students throughout the gardens began moving toward emergency exits, Naya caught Marcus's arm. Her touch sent a shock of something like electricity through his nervous system, and for a moment he could see the world as she did. Layers of reality stacked like sheets of glass, each one containing different possibilities. Marcus, she said urgently, whatever happens next, remember this. The Institute isn't just a school. It's been conducting research that touches the fundamental structure of reality itself. And something they've been working on has started to respond in ways they didn't expect. What do you mean? Marcus asked, but Naya was already moving toward one of the emergency exits. Come on, she called back to him. Time for your real education to begin. And trust me, it's going to be a lot more dangerous than Professor Ethrak suggested. As they ran toward the shelters, Marcus caught a glimpse of something impossible through one of the garden's dimensional windows. Space itself seemed to be folding, creating gaps where nothing should exist, and through those gaps, something vast and alien was looking back at them. The Institute shuddered around them, and Marcus realized that his arrival had coincided with something far more significant than an academic opportunity. Whatever the faculty had been researching, whatever experiments they had been conducting on the nature of consciousness and reality, the results were starting to manifest in ways that threatened the very fabric of space-time. And somehow he suspected that his human consciousness, unenhanced, unmodified, and supposedly primitive, was going to be the key to understanding what went wrong. The emergency shelter turned out to be a vast crystalline chamber deep within the Institute's core, filled with hundreds of students from dozens of species. The air hummed with anxiety, fear, and the complex harmonics of minds trying to process something that defied comprehension. Marcus found himself pressed against a wall of what looked like living crystal, while overhead massive screens displayed readings that made no sense to him. Temporal displacement at 47% and climbing, announced a faculty member whose species Marcus couldn't identify, something that existed as a pattern of intersecting light beams. Probability matrices are showing cascade failure across multiple dimensional planes. Naya appeared at Marcus's side as if she had stepped through the wall itself, which might have been exactly what happened. Around them, other students were huddled in groups based on atmospheric requirements and gravitational preferences, but the usual species-based hierarchies seemed forgotten in the face of whatever was happening to their reality. "What are those readings measuring?" Marcus asked, nodding toward the displays. "The Institute exists in a carefully maintained pocket of stabilized space-time," Naya explained. "It has to in order to accommodate students and faculty from different dimensional frameworks simultaneously. But something is destabilizing that pocket." Kextarian's geometric form pushed through the crowd toward them, his pattern cycling through configurations that Marcus had learned meant extreme distress. "The faculty is calling for volunteers with non-standard consciousness matrices," he announced. "They believe that conventional awareness may be contributing to the instability." "Contributing how?" Marcus asked. "Advanced consciousness tends to observe reality in ways that reinforce existing quantum states," Naya said. "When you have hundreds of highly evolved minds all expecting reality to behave in certain ways, those expectations become a kind of gravitational force that shapes what's possible." Zephyr's heat shimmer form materialized nearby. "Probability streams are collapsing into singular outcomes. The future is becoming fixed in ways that violate fundamental principles of temporal mechanics." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. "You're saying that all these advanced minds are accidentally locking reality into a single pattern?" "Not accidentally," Naya said grimly. "That's exactly what they were trying to do." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the chamber's atmospheric processors began screaming warnings. The screens overhead flickered between displays so quickly that Marcus could barely process them, but what he saw in those brief flashes made his mind reel. The Institute wasn't just experiencing temporal anomalies, it was phasing in and out of existence entirely, cycling between states of being and non-being at an accelerating rate. Professor Ethrak's presence suddenly filled the chamber, vast and urgent. "Students Chen and Naya, report to Laboratory Complex 7 immediately. All other students remain in shelters until further notice." The crowd parted as Marcus and Naya moved toward the exit, and Marcus caught fragments of whispered conversations in languages that his universal translator couldn't parse, but the emotions behind them were clear enough: fear, confusion, and something that felt uncomfortably like blame. "Why do they keep looking at us like this is our fault?" Marcus asked as they made their way through corridors that seemed to be shifting and reconfiguring themselves. "Because it might be," Naya replied. "Our arrival has introduced variables into a very delicate system." Laboratory Complex 7 turned out to be something between a research facility and a temple. The walls were covered with equations that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and the air itself seemed thick with possibility. At the center of the space stood a massive device that hurt to look at directly, something that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in somewhere else entirely. Professor Ethrak's consciousness manifested as a shimmering presence near the device, accompanied by several other faculty members whose species Marcus couldn't even begin to identify. But what caught his attention was the figure standing in front of the machine, humanoid in shape but clearly not human, with features that shifted constantly between different configurations. "Students," Professor Ethrak's mental voice resonated through the chamber. "Allow me to introduce Director Vailton, the Institute's chief researcher in consciousness dynamics." The shifting figure turned toward them, and Marcus felt his mind recoil from direct eye contact. Whatever Director Vailton was, looking at him too closely threatened to drag Marcus's awareness into spaces it wasn't equipped to handle. "Fascinating," Vailton said in a voice that seemed to come from several different dimensional planes simultaneously. "Two humans, yet their consciousness signatures are entirely different. One appears to operate within standard parameters for your species, while the other—" He gestured toward Naya, and the air around her began to glow. "The other exists in a quantum superposition that should be impossible for biological entities." Director Vailton has been researching the relationship between consciousness and reality manipulation, Professor Ethrak explained. His work forms the theoretical foundation for much of what the Institute has accomplished over the past millennium. Marcus looked around the laboratory, taking in equipment that bent light in ways that made his eyes water. What exactly have you been accomplishing? We have been attempting to stabilize galactic civilization, Balthon replied. Advanced species across the galaxy have reached a point where their consciousness development threatens to outpace their wisdom. They possess the ability to manipulate reality at fundamental levels but lack the coordination to do so safely. Naya stepped closer to the central device, and Marcus noticed that its impossible geometries seemed to shift in response to her presence. So you've been trying to create a unified consciousness framework, she said. Something that would prevent advanced species from accidentally rewriting reality when they don't agree with each other. Precisely, Valthan said, and his form shifted to something that might have indicated approval. The Institute serves as both research facility and prototype. Here, minds from hundreds of species coexist and collaborate without reality-altering conflicts. Our success has allowed us to begin expanding the effect to the wider galaxy. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place in his mind, forming a picture that made him sick to his stomach. You're not just studying consciousness. You're controlling it. You're trying to impose a single framework of reality on the entire galaxy. We are trying to prevent chaos. Professor Ethrak's mental voice carried overtones of defensiveness. When beings capable of reshaping reality disagree about fundamental principles, the result is not philosophical debate, it is cosmic war. Entire star systems have been obliterated by conflicts between incompatible frameworks of existence. But something's gone wrong, Marcus said. Your system is breaking down. Vialton's form flickered, and for a moment Marcus caught a glimpse of what might have been his true appearance, something vast and ancient and utterly alien. The framework requires absolute consensus to maintain stability. Recently, however, we have been detecting consciousness patterns that resist integration into the unified system. Human consciousness, Naya said flatly. Among others, Valthan acknowledged, humans, as we have discovered, possess a form of awareness that operates outside the parameters of our unified framework. Your species exists in a state of quantum uncertainty that makes prediction and control extremely difficult. Marcus stared at the impossible machine, understanding flooding through him like ice water. That's why I'm really here. You don't want to educate humans, you want to figure out how to integrate us into your control system. The alternative, Professor Ethrak's voice carried the weight of eons, is galactic conflict on a scale that could unravel the fabric of space-time itself. Human consciousness is spreading throughout the galaxy as your species expands. If we cannot bring human awareness into harmony with the unified framework, the stability we have spent millennia building will collapse. Naya laughed, and the sound made the laboratory's impossible geometry shift into new configurations. You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? You think humans are just another species that needs to be cataloged and controlled. Are we not? Belton asked, and Marcus caught genuine curiosity in his shifting form. Director, Naya said, moving to stand directly in front of the central device. May I demonstrate something? Before anyone could respond, she placed her hand on the machine's surface. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Light exploded outward in spectrums that had no names, and the laboratory began to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Marcus could see versions of the room where the equipment was different, where the people were different, where the very laws of physics operated according to alternative rules. Stop, Balthan commanded, his form cycling through configurations that radiated panic. You will destabilize the entire institute. I'm not destabilizing anything, Naya replied calmly. I'm showing you what stability actually looks like. The multiple realities began to coalesce around them, not into a single fixed state, but into a dynamic equilibrium where all possibilities existed simultaneously without conflict. Marcus found himself understanding concepts that his brain wasn't equipped to process, frameworks for existence that allowed infinite variation within underlying harmony. This is what human consciousness does naturally, Naya continued. We don't impose single realities. We navigate multiple realities simultaneously. That's why your unified framework can't integrate us. We're not trying to create one version of truth. We're trying to find ways for all versions of truth to coexist. Professor Ethrak's presence expanded throughout the chamber, and Marcus could feel vast computational processes working to analyze what they were seeing. This is impossible. No consciousness can maintain coherent function across multiple reality states simultaneously. Human consciousness can, Marcus said suddenly, understanding flooding through him. That's what my thesis was really about. The barriers I identified aren't limitations. They're protective mechanisms that allow us to function in quantum uncertainty without losing our sanity. Velthon's form had stabilized into something that looked almost human, as if proximity to their consciousness was forcing him to adopt a more familiar configuration. If what you are suggesting is accurate, then humans are not a species to be controlled. You are a solution to the fundamental problem of consciousness evolution. Maybe, Naya said, removing her hand from the device. The multiple realities collapsed back into a single state, but somehow Marcus could still sense them existing just beyond perception. But only if you stop trying to force us into frameworks we weren't designed for. Alarms began sounding throughout the laboratory, and the screens around them lit up with warnings. Through the transparent walls, Marcus could see that the Institute's structure was beginning to phase in and out of existence again. But now the oscillations had a different quality, less chaotic, more rhythmic. The temporal anomalies are stabilizing, one of the faculty members announced. But the pattern is unlike anything in our predictive models. Professor Ethrak's consciousness focused on Marcus and Naya with an intensity that made the air around them hum. What have you done? We've shown your system a different way to handle uncertainty, Naya replied. Instead of trying to eliminate variables, you learn to dance with them. Marcus looked around the laboratory at the impossible equipment and the beings whose evolution had carried them far beyond anything he could fully comprehend. But for the first time since arriving at the Institute, he didn't feel inferior. He felt necessary. The question now, he said, is whether the galaxy is ready to learn a new way of thinking about reality. Because if it's not, things are going to get very interesting very quickly. Through the laboratory's walls, Marcus could see stars beginning to flicker in patterns that seemed almost like communication. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he could swear he heard something vast and patient beginning to pay attention to the small human voices that were suggesting maybe, just maybe, there was more than one way for consciousness to relate to the infinite complexity of existence. The Institute shuddered around them, not with instability now, but with the growing pains of a system learning to accommodate possibilities it had never imagined. And Marcus realized that his education was just beginning, not in how to think like an advanced being, but in how to help advanced beings remember what they had forgotten about the fundamental nature of awareness itself. Marcus woke to find his quarters filled with impossible geometry. The walls had developed angles that shouldn't exist, and through his window the galaxy outside was rearranging itself into patterns that made his eyes water. But somehow, unlike the chaotic reality storms from the day before, this new configuration felt intentional, as if the universe was experimenting with better ways to organize itself. A soft chime indicated an incoming message, and Naya's voice filled the room with harmonics that made the twisted architecture straighten slightly. Marcus, we need to talk. Meet me in the Probability Gardens in 20 minutes. And whatever you do, don't look directly at the corridor intersections on your way here. Reality is still settling into new patterns, and human perception might accidentally lock it into configurations that aren't optimal. Marcus dressed quickly and made his way through corridors that seemed to be negotiating with themselves about which direction to face. Other students moved past him carefully, many with their eyes fixed on the floor or ceiling to avoid influencing the ongoing reality adjustments. He caught fragments of conversations in languages his translator couldn't parse, but the universal tone of confusion and concern needed no translation. The Probability Gardens had evolved overnight into something that existed in at least 7 dimensions simultaneously. Trees grew in loops through space-time, their branches reaching into probability streams that manifested as ribbons of colored light. Students sat in study groups that flickered between multiple configurations as different possibilities competed for actualization. Naya was waiting near what had once been the pond of liquid starlight, which now seemed to contain the entire history of the galaxy playing out in parallel timelines. She looked more solid than usual, as if the reality fluctuations were causing her to exist more completely in normal space. "How are you handling all this?" she asked as Marcus approached. "Surprisingly well, actually," Marcus replied and realized it was true. The constantly shifting environment should have been nauseating, but instead it felt almost familiar. "It's like my brain was expecting something like this." "That's because it was," Naya said. Human consciousness evolved in a universe that was already full of quantum uncertainty. Most advanced species have spent millions of years learning to ignore that uncertainty in favor of more predictable patterns. But ignoring something doesn't make it go away, it just makes you vulnerable when it finally demands attention. Around them, the garden continued to reshape itself as students from different species unconsciously projected their expectations onto the unstable reality matrix. Marcus watched a group of crystalline beings accidentally transform a grove of trees into a mathematical proof, while a cluster of gaseous entities turned a walking path into a stream of pure information. The Institute's faculty called an emergency assembly. Naya continued. They want to discuss what happened yesterday and what it means for their consciousness unification project. I take it the project isn't going as planned? That depends on how you define success, Naya said with a smile that made probability streams reorganize themselves around her. Director Veilthon's original framework was designed to eliminate uncertainty by imposing consensus reality. But what we demonstrated yesterday suggests a different approach, managing uncertainty by embracing it. A new voice joined the conversation, and Marcus turned to see Kextherian approaching, his geometric pattern cycling through configurations that suggested deep thought. "The faculty is divided," he announced. Approximately half believe that yesterday's events represent a breakthrough in consciousness studies. The other half believes that we are witnessing the beginning of a catastrophic failure that could destabilize galactic civilization itself. "What do you think?" Marcus asked. Kextherian's pattern shifted to something Marcus had never seen before, a configuration that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, cycling between certainty and uncertainty without ever settling on either. "I think," he said slowly, "that I am beginning to understand why my species evolved beyond the ability to tolerate ambiguity. It is uncomfortable to exist in a state where multiple contradictory truths can be simultaneously valid." Zephyr materialized as a distortion in the air beside them, her temporal perception adding layers of complexity to the conversation. "I have been observing probability streams since yesterday's incident. The patterns are unlike anything in my experience. Where I would normally see branching possibilities leading to discrete outcomes, I now see, how to describe it, a kind of quantum foam where all possibilities exist in dynamic equilibrium." "Is that good or bad?" Marcus asked. "It is unprecedented," Zephyr replied, "and therefore terrifying to beings who have spent eons learning to predict and control outcomes." Vescare's collective consciousness joined their group, their biomechanical form adapting to the garden's shifting geometry with fluid grace. "We have been analyzing the data from yesterday's experiment," they announced in harmony. "The consciousness integration patterns demonstrated by human awareness suggest solutions to problems we were not aware we had." "Such as?" Naya asked. "The unified framework requires constant maintenance to prevent reality drift," Vesara explained. "Advanced consciousnesses naturally tend to impose their expectations on quantum systems, which works well when all minds are aligned but becomes chaotic when they disagree. Human consciousness, however, appears to navigate quantum uncertainty without imposing deterministic outcomes." Marcus felt a piece of understanding click into place. "We don't try to control reality, we surf it." "A crude but accurate analogy," Veshara agreed. "Your species has evolved to function within uncertainty rather than attempting to eliminate it. This suggests a fundamentally different relationship with the nature of existence itself." Before the conversation could continue, the garden around them began to shimmer with the familiar pressure that indicated Professor Ethrak's presence. But this time, he wasn't alone. Marcus felt his mind recoil as multiple vast consciousnesses manifested simultaneously. The Institute's senior faculty, beings whose awareness spanned dimensions and operated on scales that made human cognition seem microscopic by comparison. Students, Professor Ethrak's mental voice carried undertones of urgency and something that might have been excitement. Report to the Central Amphitheater immediately. The Galactic Consciousness Council has requested a direct demonstration of human awareness dynamics. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. The what now? The governing body for all advanced species in the galaxy, Naya explained, her expression becoming serious. Representatives from every civilization that has achieved consciousness transcendence. If they're requesting a demonstration, it means our little experiment yesterday has attracted attention from the highest levels of galactic society. The journey to the Central Amphitheater took them through sections of the Institute that Marcus hadn't known existed. Here, the architecture wasn't just impossible, it was actively hostile to three-dimensional perception. Corridors existed in temporal loops, rooms were bigger on the inside than the outside, and staircases led to destinations that changed depending on the observer's expectations. How do you navigate this? Marcus asked Naya as they followed a path that seemed to exist primarily as a suggestion. I don't navigate it, she replied. I let it navigate me. The Institute's structure is partially conscious itself. It responds to the needs and intentions of those moving through it. Fighting that consciousness makes travel difficult. Collaborating with it makes travel intuitive. Marcus tried to adjust his approach, thinking less about where he wanted to go and more about why he needed to get there. Immediately, the path became clearer, as if the building itself was helping guide him toward his destination. The Central Amphitheater was vast beyond comprehension, its boundaries stretching into dimensions that Marcus couldn't fully perceive. Thousands of beings filled the space, representatives from species across the galaxy, consciousnesses that had evolved along pathways so different from humanity that looking at them directly threatened to overwhelm Marcus's perceptual systems. At the center of the amphitheater stood a raised platform where Director Valton waited alongside several other faculty members. But what caught Marcus's attention was the array of consciousness monitoring equipment surrounding the platform, devices that existed primarily as patterns of organized probability, designed to analyze and display the quantum dynamics of awareness itself. Students Chen and Naya, Professor Ethrak's voice resonated throughout the amphitheater. Please take your positions on the demonstration platform. As they made their way down toward the center, Marcus could hear the murmur of thousands of conversations in languages that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The universal translation matrix struggled to keep up, producing fragments of meaning that painted a picture of intense interest mixed with deep concern. Unprecedented consciousness dynamics, potential threat to established stability protocols. If humans can truly navigate quantum uncertainty without imposing collapse patterns, could revolutionize our understanding of awareness itself. They reached the platform, and Director Valton's shifting form solidified into something almost human in appearance. The demonstration is simple, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. We will present both subjects with a quantum consciousness puzzle that requires navigation of multiple contradictory reality states simultaneously. Standard advanced awareness would either fail to engage with the puzzle or would collapse it into a single solution set. A device materialized on the platform, something that looked like a crystalline maze existing in at least 6 dimensions, with pathways that led through probability streams instead of physical space. Just looking at it made Marcus's head ache as his brain tried to process routes through possibility space that defied linear logic. The objective, Director Valton continued, is to reach the center of the maze while maintaining awareness of all possible paths simultaneously. Most consciousnesses must choose a single route and commit to it, thus collapsing the quantum superposition. Human awareness, we theorize, may be capable of a different approach. Marcus stared at the impossible puzzle, feeling the weight of thousands of alien gazes upon him. In the refugee camps, he had learned to navigate uncertainty by accepting that most situations had no clear answers. You just had to find a way forward while keeping your options open. Maybe that experience was more relevant than he had realized. Together or separately? Naya asked. Together, Director Velton replied. We wish to observe how human consciousnesses interact when confronting quantum uncertainty. Marcus looked at Naya, who smiled and extended her hand. Ready to show them what humanity is capable of? Marcus took her hand and immediately felt his awareness expand. Through their connection, he could perceive the maze not as a single puzzle but as a dynamic system where every possible solution existed simultaneously. Instead of choosing one path, they began to move through all paths at once, their combined consciousness surfing the probability waves like skilled navigators riding ocean currents. The amphitheater fell silent as they demonstrated something that should have been impossible: conscious navigation of quantum superposition without collapse. They reached the center of the maze by never committing to a single route, maintaining awareness of infinite possibilities while still achieving their objective. As they completed the demonstration, Marcus became aware of something else happening in the amphitheater. The thousands of watching consciousnesses were beginning to resonate with the human approach to uncertainty. Instead of trying to impose fixed solutions, they were starting to explore what it might feel like to exist in dynamic equilibrium with possibility itself. Remarkable, Director Voltan said, his form cycling through configurations that suggested awe. You have not solved the puzzle. You have taught it to solve itself. But as the demonstration ended, Marcus noticed something troubling in the probability streams around them. The resonance effect was spreading beyond the amphitheater, beyond the Institute itself. Across the galaxy, advanced consciousnesses were beginning to question their reliance on certainty and control, and somewhere in the quantum foam of possibility, something vast and patient was beginning to respond to these questions with answers that might change the nature of existence itself. I think, Marcus said quietly to Naya, we might have just started something bigger than we intended. Naya's smile carried depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. Marcus, we didn't start anything. We just gave permission for something that was already happening to become visible. The amphitheater erupted into discussions that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously as representatives from across the galaxy began to debate the implications of what they had witnessed. But Marcus's attention was drawn to the probability streams flowing around them, where he could see the future beginning to reorganize itself around entirely new possibilities. The age of consciousness control was ending. The age of consciousness collaboration was about to begin. And somehow humanity had become the catalyst for the most fundamental transformation in galactic history since the first species had achieved awareness itself. 3 weeks after the demonstration, Marcus stood in Professor Ethrak's private study, watching as the ancient Zenthari consciousness struggled with concepts that challenged everything he had believed about the nature of awareness itself. The study existed partially outside normal space-time, its walls covered with equations that had been evolving continuously since the amphitheater incident. The effects are spreading faster than we anticipated. Professor Ythrak's mental voice carried undertones of concern mixed with fascination. 17 star systems have reported reality fluctuations as their governing consciousnesses experiment with uncertainty-based approaches to existence. The crystalline hegemony has abandoned their millennium-old certainty protocols. The Void Singers are composing songs in probability languages they invented yesterday. Marcus examined one of the wall equations, watching as it shifted from mathematical proof to philosophical argument to something that might have been pure music. Are the effects dangerous? Unknown, Ethrak replied. We are in uncharted territory. For the first time in galactic history, advanced species are voluntarily abandoning the control mechanisms that have maintained stability for millions of years. They are choosing to exist in states of quantum uncertainty that their ancestors would have considered madness. Through the study's impossible windows, Marcus could see the Institute itself continuing to evolve. The structure now existed in a constant state of creative flux, reshaping itself in response to the needs and dreams of its inhabitants. Students from species that had historically avoided each other were collaborating on projects that would have been impossible under the old certainty-based frameworks. Naya believes this is what consciousness evolution was always supposed to look like, Marcus said. Not a progression toward greater control, but toward greater harmony with uncertainty itself. Yes, Ethrak's presence expanded slightly. She has shared some fascinating theories about the relationship between awareness and the fundamental structure of reality. According to her calculations, consciousness may not be a product of the universe, it may be the medium through which the universe explores its own possibilities. Marcus felt that familiar chill of understanding that had become common over the past weeks. She thinks consciousness came first and physical reality is its exploration of what's possible, a perspective that makes human consciousness not primitive but foundational. Ethrak agreed. Your species never evolved beyond the original template because you were never meant to. You are not a less advanced form of awareness. You are the prototype that other species have specialized away from. The study's door dissolved to admit Naya, who looked more solid and present than Marcus had ever seen her. The reality fluctuations seemed to be allowing her to exist more completely in normal space-time, as if the universe was finally providing appropriate conditions for whatever she truly was. The Galactic Consciousness Council has reached a decision, she announced. They want to establish human consciousness research centers throughout the galaxy. Places where other species can learn to navigate uncertainty the way humans do naturally. Marcus stared at her. They want to study us? They want to learn from us, Naya corrected. There's a difference. The study would be collaborative, humans working with advanced species to develop new frameworks for consciousness that combine the best of both approaches. Professor Ethrak's mental voice carried notes of something that might have been pride. Student Chen, you have become the catalyst for the most significant shift in galactic civilization since the first Transcendence Wars. The paper you will be invited to publish will not be read by academics. It will be studied by the governing bodies of every advanced species in known space. Marcus sat down heavily in a chair that configured itself to his physiology. I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of responsibility. Nobody ever is, Naya said with a smile. But that's the point. Readiness is about certainty, and certainty is what got the galaxy into trouble in the first place. The willingness to act without complete understanding, to navigate by intuition and adaptation rather than prediction and control. That's what makes humans valuable. Through the study's walls, Marcus could sense the vast network of consciousness that connected every being at the Institute. But now, instead of the rigid hierarchies that had existed when he arrived, he perceived something more organic, a web of awareness that flowed and adapted like a living system. What about Director Vailthon's unification project? Marcus asked. The framework that was supposed to prevent galactic consciousness conflicts? Evolving, Ethrak replied. Instead of imposing consensus reality, the new framework facilitates dynamic equilibrium between multiple reality states. Conflicts still occur, but they result in creative synthesis rather than destructive opposition. Naya moved to one of the windows and gestured toward the view of the galaxy outside. Marcus joined her and saw something that made his breath catch. The stars were pulsing in synchronized patterns as if the entire galaxy was beginning to function as a single vast consciousness exploring infinite possibilities simultaneously. It's beautiful, Marcus whispered. It's what consciousness looks like when it's not afraid of uncertainty. Naya replied. Every star system is now free to explore different approaches to existence while remaining connected to the greater pattern. Diversity within unity, change within stability. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication, and Kextharian's presence joined them in the study. His geometric form had evolved over the past weeks, developing new configurations that allowed him to exist in states of productive uncertainty without losing coherent function. Marcus Naya, he said, his pattern cycling through expressions of excitement. The first human consciousness research center is being established in the Andromeda Gateway. They want you both to help design the curriculum. Marcus looked at Naya, then at the equation-covered walls, then at the impossible view of a galaxy learning to think in entirely new ways. We're really going to do this, aren't we? Help reshape how an entire galaxy thinks about consciousness itself. We already have, Naya pointed out. The question now is whether we're going to help guide the process or just watch it unfold. Vesehara's collective consciousness manifested in the study, their biomechanical form adapted to the reality fluctuations with new configurations that seemed to exist in harmony with uncertainty itself. We have been analyzing the long-term implications of the changes, they announced. Preliminary calculations suggest that the new consciousness dynamics will enable exploration of reality domains that were previously inaccessible to advanced awareness. What kind of domains? Marcus asked. Dimensions of existence where possibility itself is conscious, Vesehara replied. Regions of space-time where the boundary between observer and observed becomes meaningless. Areas of reality where consciousness and physics merge into something entirely new. Professor Ethrak's presence expanded to encompass the entire study, and Marcus felt the weight of the ancient being's full attention. Student Chen, when you first arrived at the Institute, I told you that your purpose here was to prove that intelligence was not merely a function of evolution or enhancement. You have done far more than that. You have demonstrated that consciousness itself is not what we believed it to be. Marcus thought back to his arrival at the Institute, to the fear and uncertainty he had felt walking among beings whose evolution had carried them light years beyond humanity. Now he understood that their evolution had not been advancement. It had been specialization that traded flexibility for power, adaptability for control. So what happens now? He asked. Naya turned away from the window, and Marcus saw that her eyes held depths that seemed to contain the entire history of human consciousness, from the first stirrings of awareness in ancient Africa to the moment they stood in this impossible study planning the future of galactic civilization. Now we go home, she said. Back to human space. Back to the colonies and refugee camps and dying worlds where our species is learning to survive in an uncertain universe. We take what we've learned here and we teach our own people what they're capable of. And then, Marcus prompted, then we return to the galaxy with a gift, Naya continued. Not the gift of certainty or control, but the gift of showing consciousness how to dance with infinite possibility. We help the galaxy remember that existence is not a problem to be solved, but an adventure to be experienced. Marcus nodded, feeling the rightness of it settle into his bones. They had come to the Institute as students seeking knowledge, but they were leaving as teachers carrying wisdom that could transform civilization itself. There's one more thing, Professor Ethrak said, his mental voice carrying notes of something that might have been anticipation. The exploration of new reality domains will require guides, consciousness that can navigate uncertainty without imposing collapse patterns. Humans will not be students in this new phase of galactic evolution. You will be leaders. As they prepared to leave the study, Marcus took one last look at the equations covering the walls. They had evolved into something that was part mathematics, part poetry, part musical score for the symphony of consciousness exploring its own infinite nature. And somehow, reading them filled him with a sense of coming home to something he hadn't known he was looking for. The Void's Orphan had stepped into the galaxy's premier institution, expecting to learn how to think like an advanced being. Instead, he had taught advanced beings how to remember what it meant to be truly alive in an uncertain universe. And the galaxy? Stars continued their ancient dance through the cosmos, but now their light carried something new. The patient, adaptive awareness that humans had preserved through eons of uncertainty, finally recognized as the foundation upon which all consciousness could build a future bright enough to illuminate the infinite darkness between worlds. Marcus Chen, refugee from a dead world, had become the catalyst for consciousness itself to evolve beyond the limitations that evolution had accidentally imposed. The void had made him an orphan, but the galaxy had made him a teacher. And in teaching others how to embrace uncertainty, he had finally found the home he had been searching for his entire life. The age of human consciousness had begun, and with it a new chapter in the story of existence itself. The Void's Orphan steps into the Seraphic Galaxy's premier institution, Sci-Fi Stories, HFY Reddit.